The old clock on the wall of Westbrook Conservatory ticked steadily as Rose Phillips moved her mop across the polished wooden floor. At 42 years old, she had cleaned these halls for almost 15 years now. The building was quiet this evening, with most students and teachers gone for the day. Only the occasional note from a practice room broke the silence. Rose paused her work, resting her hands on the mop handle as the beautiful sounds of a Chopin nocturne drifted down the corridor. She closed her eyes for a moment, letting the music wash over her. This was her favorite part of the job, these stolen moments when she could listen to some of the most talented young musicians in the country. That's the third time she's missed that transition, Rose whispered to herself, noticing a slight hesitation in the students playing. She had heard this particular piece so many times that she could sense when something wasn't quite right. After the student left, Rose slipped into the now empty practice room. She set down her cleaning supplies and glanced at the gleaming grand piano. Looking around to make sure no one was watching, she sat on the bench. Her fingers hovered over the keys for just a second before she began to play the same nocturne she had just heard, but with the transition executed flawlessly. This had become her secret ritual over the years. Clean the rooms, listen to the students, and when everyone was gone, practice what she had heard. Rose had never had formal training. Her family couldn't afford piano lessons when she was growing up. But she had an exceptional ear and remarkable memory. Years of listening and secret practice had turned her into something she hardly dared admit to herself. A pianist. "You still here, Rose?" The voice startled her and her hands jumped from the keys. It was Tom, the night security guard. "Just finishing up," she said quickly, standing and returning to her mop. Lost track of time. Tom nodded, used to finding her working late. "Don't stay too much longer. Even cleaning ladies need sleep." After he left, Rose sighed and continued with her work. Cleaning lady. That's all anyone saw when they looked at her. Not that she minded the job. It was honest work that paid her bills. But sometimes she wondered what it would be like to be seen as something more. The next morning, Rose arrived early to finish some work she hadn't completed the night before. As she dusted the bulletin board in the main hallway, a colorful flyer caught her eye. Annual Westbrook Showcase, open auditions next Friday. She had cleaned the auditorium during many showcases before, but had never known the auditions were open to the public. "Thinking of auditioning, are you?" A light laugh accompanied the question. Professor Chen, the head of piano studies, was watching her with amusement. He was always kind to the cleaning staff, but Rose could see the gentle humor in his eyes at the thought of a cleaner performing at their prestigious showcase. "Oh, no, sir," Rose replied quickly, turning back to her dusting. "Just making sure everything's tidy." "Well, if you change your mind," he said with a smile that suggested he was making a joke. "Auditions start at 9. As Rose continued her work that day, the idea took root in her mind. Why couldn't she audition? There was nothing in the flyer saying it was only for students or professionals. It said open auditions, open to anyone. That evening, in her small apartment across town, Rose sat at her second-hand upright piano. She had bought it from a family moving out of her building for just $50 because it was so out of tune. She had learned to tune it herself, watching videos online and practicing until her fingers ached. "It's madness," she told herself, as she played through scales to warm up. "They'll laugh you right out of the building." But still, her hands moved to the opening of Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 2. It was ambitious, perhaps too ambitious. She had been practicing it for almost 2 years now, learning it bit by bit from recordings and videos. She never played the whole thing at the conservatory, afraid someone might hear. Here, in her apartment, with the windows closed and a blanket stuffed under the door to muffle the sound for her neighbors, she could play freely. For the next week, Rose practiced every spare moment. She woke up at 4:30 each morning to play for an hour before work. She practiced during her lunch break on an old keyboard she kept in her locker. She played until midnight, stopping only when her elderly neighbor knocked on the wall. The night before the audition, Rose could barely sleep. Doubt crept in like a cold draft. What was she thinking? People studied their whole lives to play at the level required for the showcase. She was a cleaning lady with no formal training. It was foolish to think she could compete. She almost didn't go. Her alarm went off at 6 a.m. and she lay there staring at the ceiling. Just forget it, she told herself. Go to work like normal. No one will know you even thought about auditioning. but something pushed her out of bed. Maybe it was the memory of her mother, who had always told her she had a gift. Maybe it was the thought of all those nights at the conservatory, playing when no one was listening. Or maybe it was simply that at 42, she was tired of wondering what if. Rose put on her best dress, a simple blue one she had worn to her niece's high school graduation. It wasn't fancy, but it was clean and neat. She tried to tame her graying hair into something presentable and applied a touch of lipstick, something she rarely bothered with for cleaning duties. When she arrived at the conservatory, she went to the employee locker room and changed out of her cleaning uniform. As she walked toward the audition hall, she passed several young students carrying instrument cases or sheet music. They were dressed in formal attire, suits and elegant dresses. Rose looked down at her simple blue dress and almost turned back. "Excuse me," she said to a young woman arranging papers at a table outside the audition hall. "I'd like to sign up for an audition, please." The young woman looked up, her eyes quickly taking in Rose's appearance. "Oh, are you a parent?" "No," Rose said quietly. "I'm auditioning." "Oh, I see," the woman replied, clearly surprised. "Well, we still have a few slots available. What's your name and what will you be playing?" "Rose Phillips. I'll be playing Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 2, first movement." The young woman's pen paused. The entire first movement? There was disbelief in her voice. This piece was notoriously difficult. "Yes," Rose said simply. "And you're not affiliated with any conservatory or university?" "No, I work here, actually. I'm part of the cleaning staff." The young woman tried to hide her surprise, but Rose saw it clearly. It was the same look she had seen countless times, people adjusting their perception of her capabilities based solely on her job. "I see," the woman said finally. "Well, you're all set. Please wait until your name is called." Rose took a seat in the waiting area. Around her, students were warming up their fingers, going through passages of music in their heads or nervously chatting with each other. A few glanced her way curiously. She recognized some of them. She had cleaned their practice rooms, emptied their trash cans, polished the pianos they played. As time passed, more people arrived, students, professors, even a few who looked like professional musicians. Rose's hands began to sweat. What was she doing here? This was a mistake. She should leave before they called her name, before she embarrassed herself. Just as she was about to stand up and sneak out, the door to the audition hall opened. A young man emerged, looking dejected. He had obviously not done well. The woman with the clipboard looked down at her list. Rose Phillips? Rose's heart pounded so hard she was sure everyone could hear it. She stood up on shaky legs. Around her, several people looked up, curious about this unfamiliar name. "Good luck," someone said. It was one of the students she recognized, a kind young man who always thanked her when she cleaned his practice room. Rose nodded gratefully and walked toward the door. As she entered the audition hall, she saw them, the three judges sitting behind a table. Professor Chen was there, along with two other faculty members known for their strict standards. Their eyes widened slightly as they recognized her. "Rose?" Professor Chen said, surprised. "You're auditioning?" "Yes, sir," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. One of the other judges, an older man with silver hair, leaned over to Professor Chen. Rose couldn't hear what he said, but she saw Professor Chen's slight shrug and the bemused smile they shared. "And what will you be playing for us today?" asked the third judge, a stern-looking woman who Rose knew was a famous pianist from Europe. "Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 2, first movement," Rose answered. There was a moment of silence, then a poorly concealed snort of laughter from somewhere in the back of the room. Rose realized there were other people present, students and faculty who had come to watch the auditions. "That's quite an ambitious choice," the silver-haired judge said, making a note on his paper. "Whenever you're ready." Rose walked to the grand piano in the center of the stage. This was it. After 15 years of cleaning these halls, listening to thousands of hours of music, and practicing in secret, she was about to play for an audience for the first time. As she sat down at the bench, adjusting it to her height, she could feel the skepticism radiating from the judges' table. No one believed she could do this. Why would they? They had never seen her as anything but the woman who mopped their floors and emptied their trash. Rose placed her hands on the keys. They were trembling slightly. She closed her eyes, took a deep breath, and remembered all the nights she had played this piece in the empty practice rooms, all the mornings she had practiced in her tiny apartment. I belong here too, she thought to herself. Then she began to play. The first notes filled the audition hall as Rose's fingers pressed into the keys. The opening chords of Rachmaninoff's concerto were famously dramatic, dark, powerful, and demanding. As she played them, she could feel the surprise in the room. No one had expected these sounds to come from her hands. Professor Chen sat up straighter in his chair. The silver-haired judge stopped writing and looked up. The stern woman from Europe narrowed her eyes as if trying to solve a puzzle. But Rose wasn't looking at them anymore. Her eyes were half closed as she lost herself in the music she'd practiced for countless hours. Her hands, rough from years of scrubbing floors and wiping windows, moved across the keys with unexpected grace. Years of physical labor had given her fingers strength that many trained pianists worked years to develop. In the back of the room, the whispering had stopped. The students who had come to watch, some out of boredom, some to scope out their competition, were now leaning forward in their seats. A few had their phones out, recording this unexpected moment. One student turned to another and mouthed, "Isn't that the cleaning lady?" The piece progressed into its more technical sections. Rose had always found these challenging during her secret practice sessions, but today, her fingers seemed to know exactly where to go. Perhaps it was the adrenaline, or perhaps it was because, for the first time, she was playing on a perfectly maintained concert, grand rather than her worn-out upright or the practice room pianos after hours. The silver-haired judge leaned over to Professor Chen. "Did you know she could play like this?" he whispered. Professor Chen shook his head slowly, his eyes never leaving Rose. "I had no idea." As the first movement reached its middle section, Rose's body swayed slightly with the music. Her face showed everything she felt: the passion, the sorrow, the moments of brightness breaking through the piece's overall melancholy. She wasn't performing in the way many classically trained pianists did, with practiced expressions and controlled movements. She was simply feeling the music, and it showed. In the audience, a late arrival slipped into the back row. It was Tom, the night security guard, still in his uniform. He had overheard that Rose was auditioning and had come straight from his night shift, curious to see what would happen. His tired eyes widened as he realized what he was witnessing. "Well, I'll be," he whispered to himself. The music grew more intense. This part of the concerto required not just technical skill, but emotional depth. Many young pianists struggled with it, playing the notes perfectly but missing the heart of the piece. Rose had no such problem. Years of hard work, of dreams deferred, of watching others succeed where she never had the chance. All of it poured through her fingers into the music. The stern judge from Europe had pulled out her glasses now, as if she couldn't quite believe what she was seeing without them. Her pencil remained untouched on her notepad. There was nothing to write, not yet. She was too busy listening, too busy watching this woman she had passed in the hallways 100 times without really seeing her. Rose reached a particularly difficult passage, a series of runs that required speed and precision. She had practiced this section more than any other, breaking it down note by note in her tiny apartment, playing it so many times that her downstairs neighbor had once pounded on his ceiling with a broomstick. Now her fingers flew across the keys with confidence. The door at the back of the audition hall opened again. The conservatory director, Dr. Wallace, stepped in. He had heard from his assistant that something unusual was happening in the auditions. Seeing Rose at the piano, he frowned in confusion and took a seat in the back row. "Who is that?" he whispered to the student beside him. "The cleaning lady," the student whispered back, not taking his eyes off Rose. Dr. Wallace's eyebrows shot up. Like everyone else, he settled in to listen. As the first movement neared its conclusion, Rose felt a strange calmness wash over her. Whatever happened after this, whether they laughed her out of the room or not, she had done it. She had played for an audience. She had shown what she could do. For the first time in her life, people were seeing the part of her that she had kept hidden for so long. The final notes of the movement rang out, powerful and resolute. Then silence filled the hall. Rose's hands rested on her lap. She was breathing hard, partly from the physical effort of the piece, partly from the emotion of the moment. She didn't look up at first, afraid of what she might see on the judges' faces. The silence stretched for several seconds. It felt like hours to Rose. Then, from the back of the room, someone started clapping. It was Tom, the security guard. He stood as he applauded, a huge grin on his face. The students joined in, and soon the entire room was filled with applause. Rose finally looked up at the judges. Professor Chen was smiling broadly. The silver-haired judge was applauding with the rest. Even the stern European woman had a look of respect on her face, though she wasn't clapping yet. "Ms. Phillips," Professor Chen said when the applause died down. "That was an unexpected," Rose nodded, not sure what to say. Her heart was still racing. "How long have you been playing?" the silver-haired judge asked. "All my life, sir," Rose answered, "but mostly just on my own. I've never had proper lessons." This caused another stir in the room. To play at this level without formal training was almost unheard of. "And how did you learn this piece?" the stern judge asked, speaking for the first time. Her accent was thick, but her English was perfect. Rose hesitated. "I listened to the students practicing, and I watched videos online. I've been working on it for almost 2 years now." The three judges exchanged looks. This was not a standard audition situation. Nothing in their usual scoring rubrics covered this scenario. Professor Chen cleared his throat. "Ms. Phillips, would you mind stepping outside for a moment while we confer?" Rose nodded and stood up from the piano bench. Her legs felt shaky. As she walked toward the door, students and faculty watched her pass with new eyes. No longer the invisible woman who cleaned their spaces, but a musician who had just done something remarkable. In the hallway, Rose leaned against the wall, suddenly exhausted. The adrenaline that had carried her through the performance was fading, leaving her drained. She closed her eyes for a moment, trying to make sense of what had just happened. The door opened and Tom stepped out. "Rose, that was amazing," he said, his voice filled with genuine awe. "Why didn't you ever say anything?" Rose gave a small shrug. "Who would have believed me?" More people filed out of the audition hall. Students heading to their classes or to the practice rooms. Faculty members rushing to other commitments. Many nodded to Rose as they passed. Some offered congratulations. It was strange to be suddenly visible to these people who had looked through her for years. After about 10 minutes, the door opened again and Professor Chen appeared. "Ms. Phillips, we'd like to speak with you." Rose took a deep breath and followed him back inside. The other two judges were still at the table. Dr. Wallace had joined them. Rose stood before them, her hands clasped in front of her to hide their slight trembling. "Ms. Phillips," Dr. Wallace began, "I must say, in my 15 years as director of this conservatory, I've never witnessed anything quite like what I just saw." Rose swallowed hard. "Was that good or bad?" "We have a few questions," the stern judge said. "You said you have no formal training?" "That's right," Rose answered. "My family couldn't afford lessons when I was young. And later, well, life happened. Yet you work here at the conservatory," the silver-haired judge observed. "Yes, sir, for almost 15 years now. And in that time you've been, what, learning by listening?" Professor Chen asked. Rose nodded. "I listen to the students practice, and sometimes when everyone's gone home I practice too." She glanced down. "I'm sorry if that's not allowed." Dr. Wallace waved away her concern. "The pianos are meant to be played, Ms. Phillips, though I admit, I wish we'd known we had such talent among our staff. The question now," the stern judge said, "is what to do about your audition." Rose's heart sank a little. Here it came. The moment where they would politely explain that the showcase was really meant for students and professionals, not cleaning staff. "Technically," Professor Chen said, "the showcase auditions are open to the public. There's no rule saying Ms. Phillips can't participate." "It's not a question of rules," the stern judge replied. "It's a question of standards. We have a reputation to maintain." Rose prepared herself for rejection. She had expected this, really. It was enough that she had played, that they had heard her. "I believe," Dr. Wallace said slowly, "that our reputation would only be enhanced by including genuine talent, regardless of its source." He looked directly at Rose. "Ms. Phillips, your performance was extraordinary, especially considering your lack of formal training. There are technical elements that could be refined, certainly, but the musicality, the emotional depth, these cannot be taught." Rose hardly dared to breathe. Was he saying what she thought he was saying? "I agree," Professor Chen said. "In fact, I would be interested in working with Ms. Phillips to refine those technical elements if she's willing." The silver-haired judge nodded his agreement. All eyes turned to the stern European judge who had been the most skeptical. She studied Rose for a long moment. "In my country," she said finally, "there is a saying, True talent will always find a way to bloom even through concrete. A small smile appeared on her usually serious face. I think we have witnessed such a bloom today. Dr. Wallace smiled. Then it settled. He turned to Rose. Ms. Phillips, we would like to invite you to perform in this year's showcase. And if you're interested, to discuss the possibility of special student status here at the conservatory. Rose couldn't speak for a moment. This was beyond anything she had dared to hope for when she walked into the audition hall. Thank you, she managed finally. I would be honored. As she left the audition hall, Rose felt as though she was walking in a dream. The hallway she had cleaned for 15 years seemed different somehow. Or perhaps it was she who was different. Tom was waiting outside. Well? He asked eagerly. Rose's face broke into a wide smile. I'm in, she said simply. I knew it. Tom exclaimed, giving her a quick hug. Wait till the others hear about this. Rose Phillips, piano virtuoso. Rose laughed. I wouldn't go that far. But as she walked down the hallway, she stood a little straighter than before. For the first time in her life, she was not just Rose Phillips, cleaning lady. She was Rose Phillips, pianist. And that changed everything. Word spread quickly through the Westbrook Conservatory. By lunchtime, everyone had heard about Rose Phillips, the cleaning lady who played Rachmaninoff like a professional. Students gathered in small groups discussing what they'd heard or seen. Those who had witnessed her audition were suddenly popular, pressed for details by those who had missed it. I'm telling you, it was like watching a completely different person, said one young violinist to her friends. 1 minute she's mopping the practice room floors. The next she's playing one of the hardest piano pieces ever written. In the faculty lounge, Professor spoke in hushed tones about what had happened. Self-taught, can you imagine? Professor Chen said, shaking his head in wonder. All these years and none of us noticed. It makes you wonder, replied the silver-haired judge, Professor Winters. How many others like her are out there? People with extraordinary gifts who simply never had the opportunity. Rose herself was in a daze. After her audition, she had gone to the employee locker room, changed into her work uniform, and started her usual cleaning routine. It felt surreal to be emptying trash cans and mopping floors just hours after such a life-changing moment. But the work was familiar, comforting in its routine, and gave her time to process what had happened. As she cleaned the hallway outside the practice rooms, a group of piano students walked by. They fell silent when they saw her. Then one of them, a young man with glasses, stepped forward. Ms. Phillips, he said, I was at your audition this morning. I just wanted to say, that was incredible. Rose felt her cheeks warm. Thank you, she said quietly. I've been working on that same piece for months, he continued. If you have time sometime, would you mind showing me how you approached that middle section? The fingering you used was different from what I've been taught, but it sounded so much clearer. Rose stared at him in surprise. This student, this properly trained young musician from a good family who could afford the conservatory's steep tuition, was asking her for advice. Sure, she said finally. I'd be happy to. The student grinned. Great. I'm in practice room 12 most afternoons. Just stop by whenever you're free. As the group moved on, Rose leaned on her mop, trying to make sense of this new reality. Yesterday, these students barely noticed her. Today, they were asking for her help. At the end of her shift, Rose was called to Dr. Wallace's office. She had never been there before, though she had cleaned the outer reception area many times. The director's office was impressive. Large windows overlooking the conservatory gardens, walls lined with photos of famous musicians who had performed there, awards and recognitions displayed in glass cases. Dr. Wallace stood as she entered. Ms. Phillips, please have a seat. Rose sat nervously on the edge of a leather chair. I've been speaking with the faculty about your situation, he began. It's quite extraordinary. We've never had anything like this happen before. Rose nodded, unsure what to say. Professor Chen is particularly interested in working with you. He believes, as do I, that with some formal training to fill in the gaps, you could develop into a truly exceptional pianist. That's very kind, Rose said. But I don't see how. I have to work. I can't afford tuition. Dr. Wallace nodded. Yes, that's precisely what I wanted to discuss. The board and I have agreed to offer you a special scholarship. It would cover your tuition for private lessons with Professor Chen and allow you to participate in master classes as your schedule permits. Rose's eyes widened. A scholarship for me? Yes, we're calling it the Exceptional Talent Pathway. Though to be honest, we created it specifically for your situation. Dr. Wallace smiled. We're also prepared to adjust your work schedule. You'll keep your position and salary, but with reduced hours to allow time for practice and lessons. Rose couldn't believe what she was hearing. After years of cleaning up after the talented, she was being offered a chance to be one of them. Why? She asked finally. Why would you do this for me? Dr. Wallace leaned forward. Ms. Phillips, music is not meant to belong only to those who can afford lessons from childhood or who have the right connections. True musical gift is rare and precious regardless of where it comes from. It would be a disservice to music itself to ignore what we heard today. Tears filled Rose's eyes. Thank you, she whispered. I don't know what else to say. You've already said plenty through your playing, Dr. Wallace replied. Now there's the matter of the showcase. It's in 6 weeks. Professor Chen would like to start working with you immediately if that's agreeable. Rose nodded eagerly. Yes, absolutely. Excellent. And one more thing. We'd like you to close the showcase. It's our final performance slot, reserved for our most impressive performer. Rose's hand flew to her mouth. Close the showcase. Are you sure? Completely sure, Dr. Wallace said firmly. After what we heard today, there's no doubt you deserve that spot. As Rose left the office, she felt as though she was floating. The hallways she had walked for 15 years looked different now, full of possibility rather than reminders of a dream deferred. The following weeks were the most intense of Rose's life. By day, she cleaned the conservatory for 4 hours instead of her usual 8. Then she spent 2 hours with Professor Chen, learning the formal techniques she had missed without training. The rest of her time was devoted to practice. Professor Chen was a demanding teacher, but he respected Rose's natural musicality. Rather than trying to reshape her playing completely, he focused on giving her the technical tools to express herself even more effectively. Your hands have remarkable strength, he told her during their first lesson. Years of physical work have given you an advantage there, but your technique needs refinement. Watch how I position my wrist here. Rose absorbed everything like a sponge. All those years of listening and watching had prepared her to learn quickly. What might have taken another adult student months to grasp, Rose often mastered in days. The other faculty members took notice. The stern European judge, who Rose now knew was Madame Belova, one of the most respected piano teachers in Europe, occasionally observed Rose's lessons. Your left hand is too dominant in this passage, she would comment. The melody should sing above the accompaniment. Her critiques were always direct but never unkind. Rose came to value her rare words of approval more than almost anyone else's. As news of Rose's story spread beyond the conservatory, local media became interested. A reporter from the city newspaper came to interview her. At first, Rose was reluctant. She had never sought attention. But Dr. Wallace convinced her that her story might inspire others. Think of all the people out there with hidden talents, he said. Your story could give them courage to pursue their dreams, regardless of their age or circumstances. So Rose agreed to the interview, speaking candidly about her lifelong love of music, the financial hardships that had prevented her from pursuing it formally, and the years she spent learning in secret. I never expected any of this, she told the reporter. I just wanted to play, to make music. That was enough for me. The article ran with the headline, From Cleaning Staff to Concert Pianist, The Remarkable Journey of Rose Phillips. It was accompanied by a photo of Rose at the piano, her face serene as her hands hovered above the keys. The story resonated with people. The conservatory began receiving calls and emails from all over the city, people asking if there were programs for adult beginners, for those who couldn't afford traditional lessons. Dr. Wallace, seeing an opportunity, tasked a committee with developing community outreach programs. Meanwhile, Rose continued to work and study. The showcase drew nearer. Professor Chen added more challenging elements to her piece, pushing her to grow even further as a musician. The audience will expect something special, he told her, and we're going to give it to them. The other workers at the conservatory, the maintenance staff, the cafeteria workers, the receptionists, rallied around Rose. They covered her cleaning duties when she needed extra practice time. They brought her coffee during long rehearsals. They were proud that one of their own had broken through barriers they had all felt. You show 'em what we can do, Rose, said Betty from the cafeteria, squeezing Rose's shoulder. Even as her playing improved, Rose remained humble. She still cleaned her assigned areas conscientiously. She learned the names of every student who introduced themselves to her, and always made time for the young pianist who had asked for her help after her audition. One evening, a week before the showcase, Rose stayed late to practice on the concert grand in the main hall. The building was almost empty, just as it had been on countless nights when she had played in secret. But this time she wasn't hiding. This time she belonged. As she played, she thought about how much had changed in such a short time. 6 weeks ago, she had been invisible, just part of the background of the conservatory. Now her name was on the program for their most prestigious event of the year. The door to the hall opened quietly, and Madame Belova slipped in. She stood at the back, listening as Rose worked through a particularly challenging passage. When Rose finished, Madame Belova approached the stage. "You play with your heart," the older woman said. "Many pianists take years to learn what comes naturally to you. Some never learn it at all." "Thank you," Rose said, touched by this rare praise. "Do not thank me," Madame Belova replied. "Just promise you will never lose this quality, even as your technique improves." She paused. "I have taught many students with perfect technique who never moved an audience the way you did in that audition." As Madame Belova turned to leave, she added, "The showcase will be full. Word has spread about the cleaning lady who plays like an angel. People are coming to hear you, Rose Phillips." Alone again in the concert hall, Rose placed her hands on the keys. The weight of expectation should have terrified her. 6 weeks ago it would have. But now she felt ready. This was her moment and she had earned it. She began to play once more, her music filling the empty hall, reaching into every corner just as it had reached into the hearts of those who had heard her that first day. But this time, the music carried not just passion, but confidence. Rose Phillips was no longer hiding. She was exactly where she belonged. The night before the showcase, Rose couldn't sleep. She lay awake in her small apartment, staring at the ceiling, her mind racing through every note of her piece. 6 weeks of intensive training had transformed her playing. Under Professor Chen's guidance, she had refined her technique without losing the raw emotion that made her performance special. She got up and sat at her old upright piano. Not to play, it was far too late for that, but just to rest her fingers on the keys. This humble instrument had been her only outlet for so many years. Now it felt like an old friend who had helped her through difficult times. "We did it, old girl," she whispered to the piano. "We really did it." Morning came too quickly. Rose went through her normal routine: shower, coffee, simple breakfast, trying to calm her nerves. Today, she wouldn't be cleaning the conservatory. Today, she was a performer. She arrived early, walking through the back entrance she had used countless times as an employee. The building had a different energy on showcase day. Staff hurried about making last-minute preparations. Students in formal attire gathered in small groups, practicing breathing exercises or running through difficult passages in their heads. Rose headed to the small dressing room that had been assigned to her. It felt strange to have her own space, not to be the person who cleaned such rooms for others. She hung up the dress she had bought for the occasion. A simple but elegant blue gown that had cost more than she would normally spend on clothes for an entire year. It had been worth every penny to see her reflection in the store mirror, to feel for once like she truly belonged on stage. A knock on the door interrupted her thoughts. "Come in," she called. The door opened to reveal Tom, the night security guard, looking uncomfortable in a suit and tie. "Tom, what are you doing here so early?" Rose asked, surprised to see him during daylight hours. "Took the day off," he said, shifting from one foot to the other. "Couldn't miss your big moment, could I? Got the whole family coming, wife, kids, even my mother-in-law." He handed her a small bouquet of flowers. "These are from all of us on the night staff. We're proud of you, Rose." Tears pricked at Rose's eyes as she accepted the flowers. "Thank you. That means so much." After Tom left, other visitors stopped by. Betty from the cafeteria, Jorge from maintenance, several students Rose had befriended over the past weeks. Each offered encouragement, their belief in her a steady counterweight to her growing nerves. Professor Chen arrived an hour before the showcase began. "How are you feeling?" he asked, studying her face. "Terrified," Rose admitted. "What if I mess up? What if I forget everything I've learned?" "You won't," he said simply. "The music is in you, Rose. It always has been. That's something no amount of training can give a person." Trust yourself. As the time drew closer, Rose changed into her gown and did her best with her hair and makeup. Looking in the mirror, she barely recognized herself. Gone was the invisible cleaning lady. In her place stood a woman ready to claim her place on stage. The showcase began at 7. Rose watched from the wings as student after student performed. Violinists, cellists, flutists, and other pianists. All were talented, the product of years of formal training and privilege. Yet Rose no longer felt intimidated by them. She had earned her place here through a different path, but it was no less valid. Dr. Wallace had arranged the program so that each performer was introduced with a brief background. As Rose listened to the introductions, she realized how different hers would be. No prestigious music schools, no famous teachers, no childhood competitions won. Just a woman who loved music enough to pursue it against all odds. The conservatory's main hall was filled to capacity. Word had spread about the cleaning lady turned pianist, and people had come to witness it for themselves. The local newspaper had run a feature on Rose the day before, and a reporter and photographer were in attendance. Rose had even spotted a crew from the local TV station setting up in the back. As the second-to-last performer took their bows, Rose felt her heart racing. Next would be her turn, the closing performance, the most prestigious spot in the showcase. Madame Belova appeared beside her in the wings. "Remember what I told you," she said quietly. "Play with your heart. The rest will follow." Rose nodded, too nervous to speak. Dr. Wallace stepped onto the stage to introduce the final performer. "Ladies and gentlemen, it is my great pleasure to introduce our closing performer, whose story has captured the imagination of our entire community. For 15 years, she has been a valued member of our conservatory staff, keeping our facilities clean and well-maintained. What none of us knew until 6 short weeks ago was that during those years, she was teaching herself to play piano by listening to our students and practicing in secret." A murmur ran through the audience. Her journey reminds us that extraordinary talent can be found in the most unexpected places, and that true passion for music will find a way to express itself, regardless of circumstance. Please welcome to the stage Ms. Rose Phillips performing Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 2 First Movement. The applause was thunderous as Rose walked onto the stage. She could see Tom and his family in the 3rd row, Betty and Jorge a few rows back. Professor Chen and the other judges from her audition sat near the front. And there, scattered throughout the audience, were the students and faculty who had passed her in the hallways for years without really seeing her. Rose took her seat at the piano and adjusted the bench. The hall fell silent, the audience holding its collective breath. Rose closed her eyes for a moment, centering herself as Professor Chen had taught her. Then she began to play. The opening chords filled the space, dark and powerful. Rose felt the familiar sensation of losing herself in the music, but this time it was different. She was no longer playing in an empty room hidden from view. She was sharing her gift with hundreds of people who had come specifically to hear her. As she moved into the more technical passages, Rose drew on everything Professor Chen had taught her. Her fingering was precise, her timing impeccable, yet she maintained the emotional depth that had so impressed the judges at her audition. This was not just a technical exercise. This was her heart laid bare through music. In the audience, people leaned forward in their seats. Even those who had come out of mere curiosity were captivated. Rose's story might have brought them there, but it was her playing that held them spellbound. Halfway through the piece, Rose glanced up briefly and caught Professor Chen's eye. He gave her a small nod of encouragement, his face filled with pride. Next to him, Madame Belova sat with her eyes closed, a rare smile playing at the corners of her mouth. Rose returned her focus to the music, pouring everything she had into the climactic sections. Her hands, once rough from cleaning, now moved across the keys with both power and delicacy. The years of physical labor that had once been a reminder of dreams deferred now gave her playing a unique quality, strength combined with hard-won sensitivity. As she approached the final passages, Rose felt a surge of emotion. This moment represented everything she had worked for, everything she had sacrificed, the nights spent practicing while others slept, the dreams set aside to pay the bills, the talent hidden for fear of ridicule. The final notes resonated through the hall, lingering in the air. For a moment there was complete silence. Then, as one, the audience rose to their feet in thunderous applause. Rose stood and bowed, tears streaming down her face. The applause continued, showing no signs of stopping. Dr. Wallace came onto the stage with a bouquet of roses. Professor Chen followed, then Madame Belova, a rare honor from the stern teacher. They stood beside Rose as the audience continued their standing ovation. "Bravo!" someone shouted from the back. "Encore!" called another voice. Dr. Wallace leaned in close to Rose. "They want more," he said. "Do you have something prepared?" Rose hadn't expected an encore. She thought for a moment, then nodded and returned to the piano. The audience quieted as she sat down. "I'd like to play something different," she said into the microphone that had been set up near the piano. "This is a piece I composed myself during those nights when I stayed late at the conservatory." Surprise rippled through the audience. Rose had never mentioned to anyone that she composed her own music. She began to play a simple, haunting melody. Unlike the technical complexity of Rachmaninoff, this piece was understated, its power coming from its emotional honesty. It spoke of longing, of dreams deferred but not abandoned, and finally of hope. As the last note faded away, there wasn't a dry eye in the house. The second standing ovation was even more enthusiastic than the first. Rose stood and bowed again, overwhelmed by the response. Backstage, she was surrounded by well-wishers. Students who had once barely noticed her now sought her autograph. Faculty members who had walked past her for years now treated her as a colleague. Reporters asked for interviews. Through it all, Rose maintained the humble grace that had carried her through years of invisibility. Later that night, as the crowd thinned, Dr. Wallace found Rose in her dressing room. "Ms. Phillips," he said formally, "on behalf of the board of directors, I would like to offer you a position as our artist in residence for the coming year." Rose stared at him in shock.
"Artist in residence? Me?"
"Yes. You would give performances, teach a small number of students, and continue your own studies with Professor Chen and Madame Belova. It comes with a full salary, of course. But what about my job? The cleaning?" Dr. Wallace smiled. "I think you've cleaned enough floors, don't you? It's time for you to focus on your music." As Rose walked home that night, the stars seemed brighter somehow. Her path had not been easy or direct. There had been detours and delays, years spent doing work that had nothing to do with her true passion. Yet somehow all of it had led her here, to a moment of triumph that was all the sweeter for having been so long in coming. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. There would be expectations to meet, a new role to grow into. But for tonight, Rose Phillips, former cleaning lady and newly discovered pianist, walked through the quiet streets with her head held high and her heart full of music yet to be played. 1 year had passed since the showcase that changed everything. Rose sat in her office at the Westbrook Conservatory, a small but bright room with a window overlooking the gardens. On her desk were stacks of sheet music, student evaluations, and a framed copy of the newspaper article that had first shared her story with the world. The headline, "From Cleaning Lady to Concert Pianist," now made her smile. What had seemed like an impossible leap a year ago was now her daily reality. She was Rose Phillips, artist in residence at the Westbrook Conservatory. Her journey had not ended with that showcase performance. It had only begun. Rose glanced at the clock. Her first student of the day would arrive soon. She straightened the music on the small upright piano that stood against the wall. Her old piano from her apartment now had a place of honor in the conservatory, a symbol of perseverance that inspired her students daily. A knock on the door announced the arrival of May, a 13-year-old girl with extraordinary talent but crippling stage fright. Rose had been working with her for 6 months. "Good morning, May," Rose said warmly. "Morning, Miss Phillips," the girl replied, setting down her backpack. "Are you ready to try the piece we've been working on?" Rose asked, moving to the piano bench. May nodded, though her hands twisted nervously in her lap. "Remember what we talked about?" Rose said gently. "Everyone feels afraid sometimes. The trick isn't to get rid of the fear. It's to play anyway, like you did," May said. "When you auditioned even though you were scared," Rose smiled. Her story had become something of a legend at the conservatory, especially among students who struggled with confidence. "Exactly like that. Now let's begin." As May played, Rose watched the girl's technique. May had been trained at exclusive music schools since she was 4 years old. Yet she lacked what Rose had in abundance, the ability to connect emotionally with the music. This was where Rose's unusual background became her greatest strength as a teacher. She understood both worlds, the technical precision that came from formal training, and the raw emotional connection that came from loving music for its own sake. "Beautiful technique," Rose said when May finished, "but I want you to try something different. Close your eyes and tell me what this piece makes you feel." May looked confused. "Feel? Yes. Not what your teacher told you it should sound like, not what the composer might have intended. What does it make you feel?" This was Rose's gift as a teacher, helping technically proficient students find their own voice in the music. By the end of the lesson, May was playing with new depth, her natural shyness transformed into expressive vulnerability through the music. After May left, Rose had a short break before her next student. She walked to the window and gazed out at the gardens where conservatory students sat practicing or discussing music. So much had changed in a year. Her showcase performance had gone viral. Someone had recorded it on their phone, and the video had spread across social media. "Cleaning Lady Stunn's musical elite with Rachmaninoff," read one headline. "Hidden talent discovered after 15 years," proclaimed another. Concert halls had called with invitations. Record labels had expressed interest. Rose had been overwhelmed by the attention, but Dr. Wallace and Professor Chen had helped her navigate it all with careful consideration. She had accepted some performance opportunities, a recital at the city's main concert hall, a guest appearance with the regional orchestra, but she had declined many others, particularly those that seemed more interested in her story than her music. "Your story got their attention," Professor Chen had advised, "but it's your playing that will keep it. Choose opportunities that let you grow as a musician, not as a novelty." Rose's thoughts were interrupted by another knock. Her next student was early. Peter, a brilliant young man whose wealthy parents had provided him with every advantage, yet who played with mechanical precision and little joy. "Come in," she called. Peter entered, impeccably dressed as always. "Ms. Phillips, I've been practicing the Chopin etude you assigned. I think I've mastered the technical challenges." Rose nodded. "Let's hear it." As Peter played, Rose closed her eyes. His technique was flawless, every note perfectly timed, every dynamic marking observed. Yet something essential was missing. When he finished, Rose didn't comment immediately. Instead, she asked, "Peter, why do you play piano?" He looked startled by the question. "What do you mean? Why piano and not violin? Why classical music and not jazz? What draws you to this particular form of expression?" Peter frowned. "My parents started me on piano when I was 4. I showed aptitude, so I continued. But why do you play now? You're 19. You could choose another path." He seemed genuinely puzzled. "I'm good at it. It's what I do." "Being good at something isn't the same as loving it," Rose said gently. "When was the last time you played just for yourself, just because it brought you joy?" The question hung in the air. Rose knew she was one of the few teachers who could ask this of a student like Peter. Most of his instructors had come from the same privileged musical background he had. They understood his technical brilliance but didn't question his emotional connection, or lack thereof. "I don't know," Peter admitted finally. "That's your assignment for this week," Rose said. "No Chopin. No Bach, just find something, anything that makes you want to play for the pure joy of it. It can be a pop song, a movie theme, anything at all. Just play because you want to, not because you should." Peter left looking thoughtful. Rose had no doubt he would eventually become a professional pianist. He had the talent and the connections. But whether he would be a truly great one depended on finding his own reason to play. The rest of Rose's day followed a similar pattern. Teaching, mentoring, helping each student find their unique voice at the piano. By late afternoon, she was ready for her own practice time. The conservatory had given her access to their best performance space for 2 hours each day. As she entered the empty concert hall, Rose felt the familiar thrill of sitting at a magnificent grand piano with no one to hear her but herself. She had come so far from secretly playing after hours. Now she had the freedom to explore music on her own terms, to develop as an artist without hiding. As Rose began to play one of her own compositions, she thought about the changes her story had inspired beyond her own life. The exceptional talent pathway scholarship that had been created for her was now helping others. 5 students from disadvantaged backgrounds had received full scholarships this year. One was a grocery store clerk who played violin by ear. Another was a high school janitor with a remarkable baritone voice. Each had a story of passion persisting despite obstacles. Dr. Wallace had expanded the conservatory's community outreach programs. Free workshops, reduced-cost lessons for low-income students, and partnerships with public schools had opened doors that were previously closed to many. Rose taught in several of these programs, finding particular joy in working with adult beginners who, like her, had put their musical dreams on hold. Even the conservatory staff had been affected. Jorge from maintenance had revealed that he played flamenco guitar. He now gave demonstrations to the classical guitar students, showing them techniques that weren't in their textbooks. Betty from the cafeteria had joined the community choir. The barriers between the talented and the ordinary were gradually breaking down. After her practice, Rose gathered her things and headed for the exit. As she walked down the hallway, the same one she had once mopped every evening, she passed a woman in a cleaner's uniform dusting the display cases. "Evening. Ms. Phillips," the woman said with a smile. "Evening, Diane," Rose replied warmly. "How's your son doing with those piano lessons?" "Really well. He's practicing that piece you suggested. Never seen him so excited about music before." "That's wonderful. Bring him by my office sometime. I'd love to hear him play." As Rose stepped outside into the early evening air, she took a deep breath. The path that had led her here had been long and winding. There had been years of invisibility, of talent hidden behind a mop and bucket. But now, as she walked down the steps of the conservatory, no longer the back entrance she had used as cleaning staff, but the grand front entrance she used as faculty, she felt a profound sense of rightness. Her phone buzzed with a message from Dr. Wallace. "Performance committee meeting tomorrow. We need your input on the spring showcase theme." Rose smiled. Her opinion was valued now, her voice heard in the very institution where she had been silent for so long. As she walked home, Rose passed a small music shop. In the window was a poster advertising her upcoming recital at the city's main concert hall. Rose Phillips, Discovering Hidden Talent, read the headline above a photo of her at the piano. A young girl and her mother stood looking at the poster. Rose paused, staying just out of sight to listen. "She was a cleaning lady, Mom," the girl was saying excitedly. "She taught herself to play piano by listening to students. And now she's famous." "That's right," the mother replied. "Just goes to show you should never give up on your dreams." "I won't," the girl said firmly. Rose continued walking, her heart full. That was her true legacy. Not just her own success, but the doors it opened for others, the permission it gave people to pursue their own hidden talents. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. There was so much still to learn, so much growth still ahead. Madame Belova reminded her of this regularly, pushing Rose to reach her full potential. "You have made a good start," the stern teacher would say, "but only a start." And that was perfectly fine with Rose. Her late-blooming career gave her a perspective many of her colleagues lacked. She didn't take a single day for granted. Every opportunity to play, to teach, to share her music was a gift she had once thought beyond her reach. As Rose reached her apartment building, a nicer one now, though she had resisted moving too far upward, she thought about the cleaning lady she had once been. That woman was still part of her, still informed her approach to music and to life. She would never forget those years, nor would she want to. Rose Phillips, once invisible, was now seen and heard. And in being seen, she helped others become visible too. That, she reflected as she climbed the stairs to her apartment, was perhaps the most beautiful music of all.